crime control with deterrence can reduce both crime and imprisonment. And we have extended discussion of this issue in the paper, but that extended discussion really just goes back in a more elaborate way to the point that I made earlier in the extreme case, that if a policeman, because of their presence, can stop a crime from occurring because the would-be criminal feels certain that they're going to be apprehended. If the crime doesn't occur in the first place, that means you don't have the crime occurring, but there's also nobody to punish. And that's why you can have both less crime and less imprisonment with the right deployment of criminal justice resources. And we talk at length in the paper about the technical requirements for achieving that goal. So, some policy implications. Lengthy prison sentences cannot be justified on deterrence grounds. There's actually one thing important missing in this slide. Lengthy prison sentences in the context of the U.S., the United States' current sanction regime cannot be justified on deterrence grounds. They're either going to have to be justified on incapacitation grounds or retributive grounds. And at least in the case of long mandatory minimum penalties, and the premier example of it being California's 3 strikes laws, I think it's very hard to build a case for the effectiveness of those the effectiveness of those laws on incapacitation grounds. That shifting resources from imprisonment to policing offers a realistic possibility of reducing both crime and imprisonment. And then I say ditto for enhanced probation and parole supervisions along the lines of Project Hope. I have here, though, an important maybe, and it's appropriate. Part of the most important reason I'm saying maybe is because, ironically, is because of the work of the person who's going to be receiving one of the primary awards today, Joan Petersilia. Joan has done really important and seminal work on the effectiveness of things like intensive supervision, parole, and so forth, and in those studies, found generally null effects. And so the question of whether Project Hope can be transplanted out of rural Hawaii into the rest of the United States, I think remains an open question. I certainly hope it can, but it needs to be tested. So. The final set of slides here are really a tribute to the work of the people at this center. I think the evidence I feel makes a convincing case that, in broad strokes, that American criminal justice policy does need to be shifted, as I described, away from severity-based policies to certainty-based policies. But getting the details right on how you actually go about making such a shift is far from clear. And so we, in the paper, have a lengthy discussion of the kind of research that we think that needs to be done to fill in the details of how to do this. One is identification of high crime impact policing strategies and also parole and probation strategies. So more work along the lines that, for example, that David's done on hotspots policing. It's also important that there be careful monitoring of negative externalities. And what I have in mind here is that if we're going to, in important ways, increase the police presence, there's associated with that is also the possibility of adverse reactions from people in the community about the kinds of things that the police do, to try to control crime. Evidence on severity and the certainty effects need to be, more research needs to be done outside of the U.S. sanctioning regime. And in particular, I think European studies should be a high priority because European sentences are far shorter than they are in the United States. And we need to better understand what the deterrent effect of those penalties are. And this gets back to my point that certainty and severity interact. We also need to know much more about sanction risk perceptions. And in particular, we need to know much more about sanction risk perceptions, and now I'm using some academic jargon, of people who are on the margin of criminality. I don't mean high school students. I don't mean people in the general population. I mean people who are either criminals or seriously would-be criminals. And we need to better understand how, in particular, they perceive sanction risk. Because without that, we're not going to be able to extrapolate beyond discrete experiments in better understanding how to come up with strategies for, that effectively prevent crime. We also, in preparing this this study, I was really taken aback at how little information there is in the case of the United States at the state level about for sentence length data. We wanted to report statistics about how many people are in prison for different sentence lengths in the U.S., and the data is just not there. We need to have an in-depth research program on the effect of the experience of imprisonment on reoffending. That's something that Frank Cullen and I and Cheryl Johnson talk about at length in that other review paper. And we need to go back again and revisit the issue of incapacitation research. And really, as the note points out here, can we identify high-rate offenders? And here, what I'm thinking about is the work that Dick Burke is doing now and as well. Okay. And then finally, let me close by making some observations on some institutional issues that need to be tackled. We need to begin thinking about creating a mechanism for shifting resources from what is generally a state level function, correction, to a local level function, policing. I mean, how to go about doing that is not at all, is not self-evident. And how to go about making the shift in a fashion and ensuring that the resources are used in an effective fashion to prevent crime is also a far from non-trivial issue. In terms of the research program that I outlined, I think that the NIH provides a model for administering scientifically sound and policy-relevant research program, and that's in the context of medical research. We need to have a comparable kind of program to study the crime control effects of the criminal justice system. And it seems to me that NIJ is a natural candidate for taking on this mantle, but there's some, there's important changes that have to be made, I think, in NIJ for it to be effective in this function. And I would say that the first step in doing that should be adopting the recommendations of I have to make an acknowledgement here of an NRC panel of which I was a member of. We just released a report on the research program at NIJ, and I think we made a number of very constructive suggestions for change at NIJ, and I hope they're adopted. Thank you.